Hello and welcome back into Loftside Banter, and we have actually made it to the NFC for the team previews. Can you believe it? I've tried to push this as late as possible so that way we could see any cuts and stuff like that for teams, and kind of get a good idea what the final roster would be. Obviously, this all changes quite a bit. Even in the next week, everything's going to change, but at least we have 53 man rosters. Sounds weird. 53 man rosters, not 53 man rosters. 53 man rosters. We'll figure it out as we go along. But being at the NFC East has been an interesting division in football for a long time. I think the rivalries within this division are some of the best in the NFL. Pretty much anything that involves the Cowboys at this point really kind of shows a good game or a good rivalry. I've started the America's Team documentary on Netflix, and it's really good. And, I remember my first Super Bowls being in 92, 93. And those were obviously the Cowboys and the Bills, both years. Cowboys won both, but they were the first Super Bowls I can remember. I can remember the Michael Jackson halftime show in 92. I can remember the scores of each one of those games, even without having watched the documentary. I can remember I had them recorded on VHS, and that's kind of where my love for football came from. And I can remember my grandfather had drawn all of the logos so I could trace them and draw them and stuff like that. So that's really where it started. So there's a soft spot for the NFC East teams. I'm not a huge Cowboys fan anymore, I would say, and I guess I really wasn't, but they've been interesting over the last couple of decades. And a lot of that has to do with Jerry Jones. So we'll start with the Cowboys, who went 7-10 last year, finished third, had another injury last year. And it's starting to become an annual thing with Dak Prescott to keep getting hurt. And with the money they've spent on, offensive talent and the weapons they've put around him, we're looking at a kind of, I would say, a failed experiment with Dak Prescott as the quarterback. Now, he's been very good when he's healthy, and he can really show you and take over a game here or there. Not as much as he used to, I guess, but he's an injury-prone quarterback at this point, and the amount of money they're paying him, it's difficult. Last year, you had to rely on Cooper Rush. Cooper Rush isn't there anymore. Cooper Rush is in Baltimore. Your backup quarterback is Joe Milton. And again, as a Patriots fan, he won the last game, which lost us the first number one overall pick, which is whatever. You can't tell a third string quarterback to go out there and not play hard. But he can throw the ball further than anybody. But he can't make a touch pass to save his life. He can't do it. So if Dak goes down, yeah, you'll send George Pickens, send CeeDee Lamb as far out as they can and see if he can hit them. But you're not going to be able to run an offense with Joe Milton. He'll move the ball every once in a while and he'll show you flashes. I mean, he did that in college, and that was the reason why he still got drafted by the Patriots. But, obviously they trade for him. It's a typical Jerry Jones, trade for. And they made a lot of trades this offseason. But it was a typical trade that he wants the biggest and the best, and he and Al Davis were kind of in that category of going out and getting these guys that may not be the greatest quarterbacks or the greatest running backs, wide receivers, whatever, insert position here, but they had some special skill about them that made them stand out. Speed-wise, they can throw the ball far, they can, whatever. But, the high contracts and the drama of the Dallas Cowboys have always been the problem. The drama obviously was Micah Parsons, who as of a couple of hours ago was traded to the Packers. So we'll get into that as they kind of go on. But, the trades that he got in, Kamir Elam from the Bills as a safety, Joe Milton, as we mentioned, George Pickens from the Steelers. So it gives you CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens as your 1 and 2. I mean, the team has talent around Dak. It's just Dak tends to be on a stretcher more than anything else. So, Javonte Williams comes in from the Broncos. another guy that got injured and wasn't the same. And, he's replacing some players like Rico Dowdle, who's in Carolina now. They went out and drafted Tyler Booker, a good guard, to replace Zach Martin, who retired. But the offensive line is still going to have questions. The defense, especially not having as many high-paying players on them. And I think for what Micah Parsons got in Green Bay, it was quite a lot. I think probably a little too much. But, I mean, he is a premier edge rusher in the NFL. But you're paying him as a quarterback. But, again, that's the Packers at this point. The Cowboys obviously didn't want to pay him. Siobhan Ravel, the third-round cornerback out of ECU that they picked up, injury again at the end of college, but he was one of the best corners in college football. If you can get anywhere back to that, we're in good shape. I think you're in good shape of putting a good, possibly shut down corner. And you got him in the third round. Like I mentioned, Zach Martin, been there for a long time, anchored that offensive line. They used to be one of the best running teams in the NFL, and they weren't as good last year. Zach Martin, obviously, like I mentioned, retired. Jordan Lewis goes to the Jaguars cornerback. Rico Dowdle, that I mentioned that, and Cooper Rush is gone. So, I mean, they lost some pieces that weren't necessarily the most important, but good complementary pieces. Zach Martin was an anchor, but the question now with Dallas is Jerry Jones too old to be the GM? And we've gone back and forth of this, and he's addressed this in the media. He's said all these different things. We're at a point where he's 80-something years old, and I know he doesn't want to give up control. I mean, you can even tell in the documentary that he had a problem sharing any sort of success with anybody. So I think he's past the point of being effective. I think he needs to move on. They obviously got a new head coach in Brian Schottenheimer, who seemed like a desperation hire, whereas the offensive coordinator last year. I just don't think the Cowboys are premier stop anymore. I mean, Mike McCarthy did all right with the roster that he had and the injuries that he went through and everything else, but he wasn't retained. He'll be a hot commodity next year. That's what the NFL does. It recycles people at this point. But, you're talking about a roster put together by Jerry Jones that, again, you're going out and getting these players like Joe Milton that are just not NFL quarterbacks, but they'll throw, he'll throw the ball, all of 100 yards, whatever it is. I don't know if he can actually throw it 100 yards, but you know what I mean. Offensive line is going to be a little shaky still. How do they replace Zach Martin? Is Booker going to be the guy? And can they make the playoffs if everybody stays healthy? I mean, they've obviously lost a edge rusher that would make a difference sometimes in a game. So where does this team fall? Is this team still falling in third place in the NFC East? It's quite possible, because I think the Commanders are probably still better. I definitely think the Eagles are better. And the Eagles have questions after a Super Bowl run. But, do they push for the playoffs is where we're going to be, and that's the success rate. Obviously, Super Bowl or bust with the Cowboys at all points in time, but I don't think they're close. Especially when you're relying on Dak Prescott to not be in the blue tent. Philadelphia Eagles, your Super Bowl champions. They had a big, bad defense in 2024, a defense that could shut down anybody. And they had a few bumps along the way, but they played like Super Bowl champions pretty much the entire season. I think they lost the game to the Falcons or something like that, and they kind of rode that loss into just a great season. It seemed like the offensive weapons last year finally all clicked. They all seemed to be on the same page. They all seemed to work together. I mean, this A.J. Brown and Jalen Hurts, do they actually like each other thing, was a storyline last year. I don't think they really cared about it. And then their main pieces got extensions. Saquon Barkley, Lane Johnson, Cam Jurgens, Dallas Goedert all got extensions. So they're bringing back core pieces from a championship team. And I think Howie Roseman does a great job putting together an NFL roster. top to bottom. Some of the ins, Josh Uche, former Patriot and Chiefs linebacker. A.J. Dillon comes over from the Packers. They traded for Dorian Thompson-Robinson and then just cut him. So, again, not necessarily a great trade there, but, it was basically for Kenny Pickett. And now Kenny Pickett's not with the Browns. So, I mean, everybody kind of ended up in the same spot. Adoree Jackson comes over, a cornerback from the Giants, to help out that secondary. Because the defense was pulled apart in the offseason. The defense was just good. Your defensive line coach is now the defensive coordinator in New England. Your offensive coordinator is now the head coach for the New Orleans Saints. So they got decimated after. I mean, Super Bowl teams normally get pulled apart. Jahad Campbell, their first round pick, end of the first round out of Alabama, linebacker. And then Andrew Makuba. I really love that name. But Andrew Makuba seemed to be everywhere as a safety. Again, so they drafted for the defense to replace players that were gone. Mekhi Becton, who they completely transformed. I mean, he was supposed to be the next big left tackle. And the dude's 6'7", 338 or something like that. And he played guard all last year, and he played excellent. He's now in, I want to say San Diego all the time, but he's with the Chargers. Avonte Maddox goes over to the Lions, cornerback. Oren Burks goes, the linebacker, goes to the Bengals to try to help that defense. Milton Williams with the Patriots. Brandon Graham finally retired out of the NFL. And then Josh Sweat signed a big contract. He's the defensive end that they had last year with the Arizona Cardinals. So this defense has been pulled apart. And if this defense is not as good as last year, it's going to be relying on the offense to score 30 points a game. And I don't think the defense would be that bad that they're giving them almost 30 points. But, it's tough to retain a championship team like you did in the early 90s and everything else like that, because the contracts that teams are throwing out are just huge. And once you get a Super Bowl title, it's kind of like, all right, well, let's go get paid. And let's make sure that, I take care of me. It's a different era. So can the Eagles maintain that from this year? And again, they're in a super competitive NFC East. The only team that I don't think is competing for the for a division title is the New York Giants. They had a disaster of an offense last year. Again, they had to watch Saquon Barkley, who they decided to give Daniel Jones all of his money, but it doesn't actually work out that way. I think sports fans know that, but you understand what I'm saying. Like, you chose Daniel Jones to pay boatloads of money, and you couldn't possibly match an Eagles offer for Saquon Barkley. Now, Saquon in New York had injury issues because their offensive line sucked, because their offense sucked, because everything else. He was making do with that, but I mean, if you're not healthy, you're not, obviously no help to your team. But they had to basically watch Saquon Barkley run over the entire NFL last year in a Philadelphia Eagles uniform. And there's huge turnover in their quarterback room this year. I don't think there's anybody from last year. Tommy DeVito was just there. Tommy DeVito's now in New England. The ins for the Giants. Paulson Adebo, cornerback from the Saints. He played really well with the Saints last couple of years. Greg Van Roten re-signed to be part of that offensive line. Again, an offensive line that wasn't very good. Jameis Winston is one of your quarterbacks. Jameis Winston is one of those players that he's fun to watch. I want to see Jameis Winston in the league forever, because he's either going to throw you 3 touchdowns, we're going to throw you 3 picks. He's just a gunslinger of every possible way you can describe him as a gunslinger. He is. He's a different version of Brett Favre, because he's got a little bit more personality to him, I would assume. Or at least it seems like that way. Anyway, but he can huck the ball over the field, but he's going to make tons of mistakes and turn the ball over. I mean, there was a year that when he was starting in Tampa Bay, he had 30 touchdowns that year and 30 interceptions, and they missed the playoffs because of it. So, I mean, he's going to give you some excitement, and he's going to break your heart. But he's fun to watch. Russell Wilson is the other quarterback. He's probably going to be the starter. He's going to make the most amount of money, but he's on a 1-year deal. coming off his time with Pittsburgh. Chauncey Goldston from the Cowboys comes over, defensive lineman. Stone Forsythe, offensive tackle from the Seahawks, comes over. Abdul Carter was their first pick, 3rd overall. I think it was probably the safest pick there, but that defensive line, the one thing the Giants have is the defensive line that will wreak havoc everywhere. So watch that defensive line. Abdul Carter is going to be in a good situation, and he's not having to carry that defensive line. The defensive line is very good even without Abdul Carter. Jackson Dart, they traded back into the first round to get Jackson Dart out of Mississippi, and I think Jackson Dart is eventually going to be the starter at the end of the year. He's going to bypass Jameson. I think he's going to bypass Russell Wilson. I think Russell Wilson's going to be a headache, just like he's been for the last few years, no matter where he is, Denver, Pittsburgh, wherever. The outs, Dory Jackson, like we said, goes to the Eagles. Drew Lock is now with the Seahawks as the backup. Isaiah Simmons, it was the one player they lost off that defensive line that meant something. And then Jason Pinnock, their safety, is now with the 49ers. The biggest questions this year are going to, like I said, who's going to be the quarterback? It's going to start off with Russell Wilson. I'm hoping we see Jameis Winston for a little bit. And then it's probably going to be Jackson Dart the rest of the year. And this team's going to win 4 games. That's where they're going to be. When will Dart take over? How long of a leash do the veterans have before they say, hey, we just got to get Jackson Dart out there? Brian Daboll is coaching for his job, and he shouldn't be, because I think he's a good coach. He's just been in a terrible situation, bad personnel moves, ones that we know he didn't agree with. So, I mean, that's where we're at. If he can get Jackson Dart in the game and he looks competent, I think he'll save his job. Whether they go 3 or 4, get 3 or 4 wins, I think they give him another opportunity if Jackson Dart looks good. If he does similar to what Drake May did last year and had some energy and stuff like that, I think Daboll will be the coach next year. Next question obviously on my list was, will Daboll survive the season? There's a lot of factors to that. And the last team, the surprise team from last year, I guess, were the Washington Commanders. And it shows when a team has good ownership what it can do. They were the Washington Redskins, Commanders football team, whatever you want to call them, have been floundering for a long time. Long time. They finally get a new ownership in place. They get some coaching that, defensive specialist that, really hasn't had a whole lot of success. Jaden Daniels. 2nd overall pick, rookie of the year last year. He's fun to watch. He gives you kind of that Robert Griffin III type feel, but he can throw the ball better. Obviously, a Heisman Trophy winner out of LSU via Arizona State. I believe he went to Arizona State for the first few years. They needed to improve their defense, especially that secondary, and the offensive line. Laramie Tunsil, traded from the Texans to the Commanders. Deebo Samuel, traded from the 49ers to the Commanders. Terry McLaurin, re-signed. You have weapons. Running game a little suspect, I think. I don't think you have the greatest running backs in that locker room. But, they go out and get Javon Kinlaw from the Jets. They go out and get Eddie Goldman from the Falcons. Dedrick Wise from the Patriots. Now, again, not top tier defensive end, but serviceable. Better than what you had. Jeremy Chin leaves the team, goes to the Raiders. Damari Brown goes over to the Jaguars. So he was a guy that was a home run hitter, wide receiver, not necessarily going to give you 15, 10 catches a game, 8 catches a game, hell, even 4 catches a game. But he was going to be able to stretch the field for you. Brian Robinson Jr. traded to the 49ers. So there was the running back that everybody thought was going to kind of share the workload, I guess. And then Jonathan Allen, huge contract, wasn't producing. Now he's in Minnesota. So they've made the necessary changes to get out of some bad contracts. They made some necessary changes to get some guys out of here to make room for younger guys. And then they've upgraded. I mean, they've upgraded where they needed to upgrade. The upgrades for Daniels, and he has veteran support now. You have named guys all around you that can catch the football. You know, we're at a point where you got 2 number ones probably on this roster. Debo was the number 1 receiver for San Francisco. Excellent pass catchers. Now we're at a point where, all right, is it enough to take that next step? I'm not necessarily sure. I think getting to the NFC Championship game was a little bit lucky last year. And again, Commander fans will say that's fine. We'll take that. But they beat a very good Lions team that everybody was raving about. Now we've made some upgrades. We've made some changes. We still have Jaden Daniels here. We have a few years under his rookie contract. Let's put something together. And again, I think they're a few moves away probably. So we'll see what happens. But if the Eagles can't reproduce the same type of defense they had last year, I think it's going to be a shootout type games that they're in. I think the Commanders have a shot. And, you know, like I said, the one big question I think they still have is, well, who's going to take over for this running game? They're young in the running back position. So somebody's got to step up somewhere. I think before we kind of get to the predictions and stuff like that, as I mentioned at the top of this, these teams, you know, Dallas and the Giants, Dallas and the Commanders, I mean, Dallas and the Eagles. I mean, Dallas has a rivalry with all three. There's definitely no love lost between all of them. I mean, you got some other ones like Philadelphia and New York, the Giants and the Commanders. You know, they're just fun. They're going to be smash mouth football. It's going to be what you kind of remember. I mean, they all still kind of operate in that same way. But at some point in time, there's got to be some consistency of winning this division. I mean, there were years where it would be a completely different winner every single year in this NFC East. I still think the Eagles have enough to win it in back-to-back years. I think your Commanders are second. Your Cowboys are probably finishing third. And again, I don't see Dak surviving the whole season. I think Brian Schottenheimer still has some growing to do as a head coach. And then I think the Giants, unfortunately, are just fourth. They're going to win, like I said, 3 or 4 games. I think Dallas is probably in the 8-win range, 7-8 wins. You know, it's going to be interesting. I think the Eagles still have enough. But I think the Commanders and I think the Eagles make the playoffs again. But that's my NFC prediction. We will be doing the NFC North next with the Bears, the Packers, obviously just picked up Micah Parsons, the Lions, and the Vikings. So those are the next 4 teams that we'll do, and we'll have that out. And we should be just about the next Thursday getting the NFC West then. And again, I wanted to make sure that we had some of the rosters in place and we kind of knew what was going on with all them. Again, I thank you all for listening. Check out LoftsideBantr.com. Check out, email us at LoftsideBantr@gmail.com. Reach out on the YouTube page. I've been getting some comments from different people. I really appreciate it. And I'm glad I could respond with some of them. But, you know, it's been fun. And then we'll get back to normal episodes. We'll do hour-long episodes going in depth. We're going to be right about the time for the MLB playoffs, starting to look ahead at the NBA, and, you know, back to it. I mean, football is football. We'll be covering every week and making assessments of teams, upsets, and everything else like that. So, again, thank you for listening to Loftside Bantr, and we will see you for the next one.